Special thanks to User Cold158 for today's review. So let's talk about Celeste. It's a Canadian indie game created by Madeleine Stephanie Thorson, a transgender game designer who in turn has somewhat of a self-insert in the game. Madeleine, also a trans woman. Now, I didn't know what to think of the game before playing it. I saw on Steam that it was a platformer, and I didn't expect it to be that literal. Opening up the game, it's a snowy backdrop, and the game is focused on platforming in the purest sense of the word, jumping around and climbing up with little to no enemies to boot. The closest thing to enemies are spikes in the abyss of bottomless pits most of the time. Your character has quite limited mobility, and I played the game for around half an hour the first time, and god damn is it hard. While the checkpoints are very lenient, the platforming puzzles in between are really frustrating in difficulty. At first, you might be thinking this game is not going to be that hard, only to be led into a false sense of security. This game can get very challenging. So, at least the controls are incredibly smooth. I played this game on a controller, and it was efficient the whole way through. The gameplay loop consists of going through each checkpoint, figuring out a way to the next area. The game's Steam page advertises over 700 screens to progress through over multiple stages. Since the jumping is very weak, you'll often have to use the dash function to get across chasms and get to certain areas. Sometimes, it's as simple as jumping between walls, and other times, there's a specific pattern you're supposed to pull off in order to progress. There's also the ability to climb, but through no fault of the game itself, half the time, I forgot I had the climbing ability. So that ended up being a hassle. Then after turning the game off and turning it back on the day after, I realized the developers actually left some accessibility options, including the ability to dash infinitely. And playing the game up until that point proved that I would never be able to beat it fair and square. So what did I do? I turned the accessibility options on to give me infinite dashes. And let me tell you, provided you turned invincibility and slowdown off, it's still quite a challenging game. I did try to force myself to dash only once half the time, but the extra dash would be there for the more difficult to pass screens. For this experience, the main motivation to continue became the story, which really started to pick up around 3 levels in. For context, this game has 10 levels, including the free update. That doesn't sound like much, but the game is quite lengthy, even with the added benefit of infinite dashes to help you get past levels. The average length according to howlongtobeat.com is around 8 hours. I would say that at its base price, it's not quite worth it in my opinion, but I got this game for free. So when it comes to the story, this game is about a trans woman named Madeleine who drives up to Celeste Mountain, based on its real-life counterpart in Canada. The story is basically a self-esteem and self-discovery sort of thing. Madeleine climbing to get higher and higher up the hill, and it's here where she comes across numerous entities. The first is Granny, an old woman who lives in the mountain. The second is Theo, a social media obsessed guy from Seattle, and a doppelganger part of Madeleine that has since been dubbed Badeline. There's some more, but each character in the game has their own distinct personalities and gimmicks. Each are uniquely designed, and despite there being next to no voice acting in the game, I easily feel the distinctions between the characters. The visuals on top of that are pretty well designed. As a pixelated art style, this is definitely one of the better looking pixelated games I've seen. The music too is pretty trippy. If I had to describe the music, it feels a lot like relaxation music. It's a more energetic version of the music you might hear in Minecraft. Fortunately, despite the fact that it'll loop a lot in normal gameplay, it'll be ages before you naturally get sick of it. I should also mention that each stage has their own different themed obstacles. To describe all the levels, you start off small, at the very bottom of the mountain, having just left your car. This is where you'll meet the elderly woman known as Granny and eventually Theo. I struggled a bit with the opening level, and considering it's the first level, it really tells me I was ill-equipped for this sort of game. This is also the only level I completed without assist on. The platform puzzles are straightforward and don't require rocket science experience to do so. After that, I had to turn assist on. In the second level, it's actually a dream sequence, and you'll come across this thing that you can dash across to the other side. Although you must have free space to go across, otherwise you're dead, and you're starting over from the checkpoint. This is where you'll meet the dual personality of Madeline. In the Haunted Hotel level, you'll come across this stuff that once you pass it, it turns into hazardous material and you can't go there anymore. The hotel level might actually be my favorite of the bunch, because on top of nice scenery, we get the eccentric ghost. Unable to move on from his obsession, Mr. Oshiro, who constantly whispers to himself. Madeline, during her journey up the mountain, offers to help Mr. Oshiro organize the messy hotel, which makes things go bad when Madeline shows up and provokes Mr. Ishiro, resulting in him attacking us out of rage. Now, as I said, enemies in this game are very rare, mostly existing as bosses. They, like the rest of the game, can be rather tricky, especially the final Madeline one. That's almost impossible. Next after that is the wind level. I call it that because the level has the wind blow the player in a certain direction, and depending on the checkpoint, this was a level I generally used infinite dashes for. You'll get these bubbles that will launch you in a certain direction, and by this point, I don't know how I would have gone past these levels if I hadn't turned on assist. Keep in mind, I did still try to somewhat challenge myself by keeping the spamming of the dash button to a minimum, and dashing only when I felt necessary to progress. The transition to level 5 consists of going up the mountain with Theo on a gondola, although Madeline tries to halt it in its tracks halfway through. And we actually get this mini game where we are forced to calm down by following a feather. We then make it to the Mirror Temple, where Madeline and Theo explore it. To make a long story short, after around 10 to 15 minutes of navigation, we re-encounter Theo all locked up, and you've got to get past these various obstacles while you're unable to dash. This trope can be seen in many games, even with the assist on. And even with the assist on, it managed to be challenging. Then we've got Chapter 6, and the thing that makes this level stand apart from the others is, for starters, we actually get dialogue options, which kept me in for around 9 minutes ironically. Keep in mind that I'm the kind of guy who rushes through games if I'm not having 100% fun with it. So after Theo and Madeline discuss their stuff, we then get another dream sequence where we use golden feathers to fly in the air, all before Madeline catches us again and opts to throw us down the mountain, as dreams awake into reality. Then in Chapter 7, we've got to make peace with Madeline. Despite the fact that she's launched us down our climb, I could feel that we were nearing the end of the game. Basically, we get what could be considered a boss fight with Madeline, which is mostly dodging her attacks and dashing towards her, and repeat until we finally beat her. Not much to say there. Then to wrap things up, we've got the last level of the vanilla game, at least until the update came out that added 2 new levels. Anyways, since we work with Madeline, we opt to launch ourselves to the top, and each segment of the last chapter is actually recycled aesthetics from earlier in the game. The hotel, the wind level, and so on. Finally, we climb up the mountain, and I get the worst ending possible. All the characters we met during the climb gather round, as Madeline decides to bake a strawberry pie. Only, I didn't realize the strawberries you collect throughout the game basically add up to how the game ends. I barely collected them throughout the game. And I found out the hard way that they're all adding up to the final cutscene where Madeline bakes a pie with barely any strawberries. Then after that is the second final level that came out in an update that came out after release. But guess what? You gotta collect bonus crap in order to unlock the rest of the level early on. Which, if there was a criticism I ever had for this game, it would be that. The fact that you punish players who aren't completionists by locking areas out that show the true end of the game. So basically what I did is that I downloaded a save file off of the internet from someone who put the hard work in and used that to complete the game. The 2 levels after that are basically reunion levels. Sort of. Chapter 9's gimmick is traveling through the center of the mountain instead of the top, and actively working against fire and ice elements, as they interchange throughout the level. Half the time it'll be heat, and half the time it'll be cold. Then to actually wrap things up, then comes the level where Granny dies, and Madeline doesn't go to the funeral due to stress and whatnot. That I can actually relate to somewhat. Anyways, basically Madeline and her counterpart travel in an attempt to see Granny, and goddamn is this level hard. Even with every assist in your control, minus invincibility, because that's just the god mode. To be honest, I was sort of skimming through the game to the end, before I finally finished it. There is a mini game you unlock right afterwards, but I don't have much to say about that. I tried it for a few minutes before I turned the game off. I should also mention that the developers made a free side game for the 6th anniversary of the original release. Celeste 64 is a Nintendo 64 style platformer that is only around an hour long, provided you don't suck at it. I tried out the game, and I don't think I was any better at this 3D counterpart. I couldn't really say there's any major difference between the two in gameplay, besides the change in dimensions. I will give them the fact that they emulated the N64 well, although I played it on a regular Xbox controller, rather than that thing that was made by aliens. So with that being said, that was my experience with Celeste. I can say that the story was certainly solid, but the gameplay in general wasn't my sort of thing. My kind of thing. So whether I can judge it accurately is iffy. I will say, however, that anyone who can adapt to the difficult precision platformer gameplay will probably have a blast if they haven't played it already. I'd say I'd give the game an 8.5 based on my experience with it. I guess I can also at least say that it wasn't preachy with the symbolism. The hint that Madeline is a trans woman comes out at the very end and doesn't impact how I see the game. And I am the sort of person who cries foul at something being woke, but that's a discussion for another time. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?